It seems like a day or two doesn't pass without reading an article or online blurb or a press release from someone about Pope Francis. The press seems to be in love with him, and rightfully so, because since his election as Pope, Francis has spoken frequently about how our church is a body that includes you and me, our church needing to focus on being of service, following the model of Christ, and becoming a servant to those in need. In fact, in the start of today's gospel, we're called again to model ourselves after Christ by following his example. So how do we model our lives after Christ? Well, Pope Francis in a Holy Thursday address said, we need to help one another. This is what Jesus teaches us, and this is what I am doing with all my heart, because it is my duty to be at your service. But it is a duty that comes not from obligation, but rather from my heart, because this is what the Lord has taught us to do through his example, to help one another always. And Francis further calls you and I to step out of theoretical discussions about our faith to become personally involved, about getting our hands dirty and encountering Christ in the messy reality of life. Writing recently that we cannot become starched Christians who think of theology calmly over a nice cup of tea. No, we have to become courageous Christians and seek out those who need help the most. And you know, we do this. We do this by living a life where we become a servant to others like Christ was. And by doing this, we lead others to live a life of service themselves. We are called to become servant leaders in a church that is called to become a servant church. Now, all of us serve as leaders in many different ways. We're a leader. We show our family how to live. But we become a servant leader when we show our children and grandchildren how to live, when we do it from our heart, from love, with the goal of touching their hearts for them to reach out and serve others. We're all a leader in different organizations and ministries we're involved in, where we speak our thoughts and share our opinions. But we become a servant leader when we participate in that conversation, keeping in mind that we represent the least privileged in our society, and focus on them, and not just the successful operation of that organization or ministry. When we gather with our friends and neighbors, we become a servant leader and serve those who are poor when we talk gently about reaching out to help others, rather than just engaging in endless background chatter. Do we spend our lives in a virtual reality world ignoring life? Or do we actually become involved in serving people in the messiness of their lives? Do we live our life as a servant, and by example as a servant leader? Or do we live our life just doing stuff, just keeping ourselves busy, just to keep ourselves from being bored? I think one way to reflect on how we're growing as a servant and as a servant leader is to ask ourselves a couple of questions. First, do those who I serve grow as persons? Do they, while being served by me, become wiser, healthier, freer, and more likely themselves to become servants? In other words, am I simply writing a check to a charity, or am I taking personal responsibility to help others grow? Am I helping my children to grow, or just dictating rules? Am I leading my friends and business associates to become of service to others by my example and how I live my life? Or is it just table talk over lunch and cocktails? And secondly, and perhaps more importantly, we have to ask ourselves, what is the effect of my service? The effect of my servant leadership, the effect of what I do to the least privileged, to those who are suffering and in pain, to those in our families, in our community, and our society. Will they benefit, or will they be hurt by my service and leadership? I think we have to recognize that becoming a servant and a servant leader requires all of us to make a paradigm shift in our thinking and in the way that we live out our lives. I beg us all to consider following the words in today's gospel. Follow Christ and make a turn in our lives and embrace Pope Francis's challenge to all of us to become a servant leader as Christ was a servant leader in our servant church today. And so I call all of us to embrace the dismissal at the end of today's Mass, where we hear the words, "Go forth and proclaim the gospel of the Lord," in the way that we live out our lives.